Excited to have you and great to see folks sticking around through all the sessions. We have a very relevant session right now focused on building AI governance program. We have a wonderful panel of experts who will be sharing their insights. So Vasudha, if you don't mind taking it away.
Yeah, thank you, Hernando. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the panel on building a responsible AI governance program. I'm a privacy program manager at DoorDash, and I have 7 years actually of experience in the privacy and cybersecurity field. I was in consulting before, and then I moved into the industry and been working in privacy ever since. With us today on the panel, we have Tarana Damania, Alexandra Robinson, Smita Rajmohan, and Mohamed Tahir. So I'll just start off with some intros. Tarana is a privacy, security, and risk assurance leader. She helped build StockX and Twitch's privacy programs, audited privacy risks at Google, and worked on risk and compliance at Ernst & Young. Outside work, she enjoys podcasts, fitness, and dancing. Welcome, Tarana. It's nice to have you on. Next, we have Alexandra Robinson. Alex is an independent, responsible AI and privacy strategist and advises organizations working in high-risk and sensitive contexts. She began her career in counter-human trafficking, digital forensics, and has since worked with public and private sector leaders to responsibly implement emerging technology in more than 30 countries in humanitarian crises. She begins a new role, which is super exciting. It starts next week, and it's in advancing the Biden executive order on AI at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, Alex, and congratulations and good luck on your next gig. Smita is a senior counsel at Autodesk, where she acts as the lead legal business partner for artificial intelligence ops. Smita is heavily involved in generative AI governance, AI development, and AI adoption across the company, working with research, product, marketing, and sales teams to drive innovation and while managing risk. Smita previously worked as a hardware product counsel at Apple, contributing to product launches for iPad, AirTag, and AirPods. While at Apple, Smita helped the video engineering team to responsibly use machine learning to improve a camera's ability to detect diverse faces. Smita also helps shape industry standards on AI strategy. Smita sits on the AI policy committee of IEEE USA, which submits comments to standard bodies such as NIST. Welcome, Smita. I think the audience is definitely going to learn a lot from your vast experience in AI and AI governance. And next, finally, we have Mohamed. Mohamed, sorry, I just closed this tab. Mohamed is the responsible AI research lead at eBay and an affiliate principal investigator at UC Berkeley's International Computer Sciences, an expert in responsible AI with foundation in human-centered computing. He has published over 20 research papers in privacy, security, and AI, including award-winning work in ACM venues. Previously, as a member of Nokia Bell Labs, a pioneering responsible AI team, Mohamed played a key role in shaping the company's AI products and policies to align with best practices. He continues to champion similar initiatives at eBay. Welcome, Mohamed, and thank you all for being here. I know it's early for some of us, but I'm really excited to get this started. So to begin this conversation, building a governance program for AI and machine learning within companies has become very, very relevant. And especially we see that a lot of privacy practitioners are getting heavily involved in, building up these programs. So just to start off and set some context, I would definitely want to know, how is it that, topics of ethics or topics of fairness and bias-free nature of, AI models and ML models, why are privacy practitioners well positioned to take on these emerging, fields of AI governance? And, how do privacy professionals need to further stretch themselves to learn about, AI and to be able to tackle AI governance more effectively? I mean, if it's okay, I would call on people to talk, but Tarana, if you could jump in and give
Sure.
us your insights on this. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Vasudha, for moderating, and thanks, I guess, to the provider team for hosting today's session. Really excited to learn and share from this interesting panel. So, first off, I love that we use the word bridge for today's event. I think of us privacy professionals as really being a bridge of sorts to work cross-functionally across an org to help an org navigate its day-to-days while staying true to their privacy posture or principle that we've developed for the org. Really, privacy risk management, user rights management, privacy principles, these are all sort of skills that I think translate well into this crazy new world of AI with all its super interesting social technical issues, including privacy as sort of a trustworthy AI characteristic, right? I think in terms of areas of growth and development, a deeper understanding of this field of social sciences and rights, ethics could really be super beneficial to us. For example, fairness could be missing even in the absence of statistical biases, where models have, demographic agnostic predictions that they've made, but the fairness is missing because of, I guess, underlying systemic or cognitive biases. And even just understanding this field better could help us make these risk-benefit trade-offs that we all have to make because of the tremendous upside potential of this technology. Other things that I found interesting in my journey is understanding how these models work better and their architecture. I guess the internet architecture is much better known, but sort of the tech stack of modern day AI and how these transformer models and these emerging new Mamba models would really help us make more informed sort of risk, impact, likelihood, understanding and decisions. What does open sourcing model weights even mean? Why is that important? How does data poisoning attack work? So that those nuances are lost without understanding model architectures, I think. And I guess the last thing I'll say is understanding model metrics better will be important for us as governance professionals. Things like precision and recall. And say you're this hypothetical social media company that prioritizes freedom of speech over safety. You'd want to maybe over optimize on a precision metric because you want to minimize your false positive content takedown requests because of policy violations, right? Or say you're actually more interested in safety over freedom of speech. Then you'd over optimize on a recall metric where you're sort of minimizing your false negatives where content is not taken down that should have been. So I guess to summarize, what we got going for us is our risk management skills, our cross-functional skills, and our just knowledge of privacy. And where we need to sort of grow, I would say, is in the field of social science, in understanding model metrics better and model architectures better. And I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, thank you, Tarana, for that. Smita?
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, I think Tarana put it really well. I think she said, essentially, one of the things she was saying was, we're very good as privacy professionals at herding the cats. And we've done it before. And I think it's going to be a key skill in AI governance, right? Because it's a new technology and you're going to need a lot of people to pitch in and give their thoughts. Because if you don't, then you're not going to have something that is truly workable for everyone in the organization. So I know we have a question about that later, but just putting that thought in everyone's mind and that everyone needs to be in this. It's not going to be just privacy working in a silo, but it's also, I think it's a good idea for privacy professionals to maybe take that job of program managing this entire thing because you're going to need so many different voices. One of the questions you also asked was, what can privacy professionals do to stretch and do this, and what else can they learn, right? And I think if anyone's been paying attention to the news lately, there are a lot of intellectual property issues with AI that is being talked about. So, the New York Times sued OpenAI because they trained on their proprietary material without consent, without payment. And I think, understanding sort of how intellectual property plays a part here, what fair use is as an exception to copyright infringement. I think all of these things can be very, not just interesting, but very valuable when doing a risk assessment on AI, right? Separate from privacy assessments, where we mostly tend to focus on data related risk and, thinking about privacy laws and how privacy laws apply to data. I think here it's also thinking about more the human interest angle of, well, this is someone's intellectual property that is going to get used to train a model. So what kind of laws could apply there? The other sort of, legal aspects of this that I think about is also just product liability. So when the output comes out of the model and is, there are outcomes in the real world, what type of outcomes are there? What type of potential harms can result? And who is liable for those harms? I think that that's another very interesting angle that if privacy professionals are taking the reins on AI governance, they probably need to consider in terms of like their different liability regimes based on where you are in the world, based on where the harm took place. There's strict liability versus fault-based liability. All of these things can be really interesting and, are easily available in terms of if you want to go and research that. But thinking about that again could really, really help you understand risk so much better. And then we could all just not just be privacy practitioner, but risk practitioners, which could be so much more interesting.
I agree. Yeah. And Alex, I know that you had mentioned earlier that, you were sort of involved in your previous roles as trying to, bridge the gap between legal and AI governance and data governance. So do you mind giving your thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. So mainly over the last year, I've helped teams work between engineering, data science, legal, privacy, all of that to at the point where our privacy policies and our data governance policies meet code. So I've seen these teams that have been working together already be in a good position to transition and build upon existing privacy program management protocols and data governance that they have in place to build upon that as they're looking at integrating generative AI or other AI models into their operations. Where I caution people is that our existing mechanisms can be really strong and help us be ready to adopt OpenAI or other generative AI models. But the level of risk, the complexity of risk, and the scale is different. And the types of data that I see organizations now being able to use and process together in data lakes and exploit is just at a level of complexity that can be new for teams that are used to working particular types of data or used to applying data governance to structured data. So a lot of what I've been working with teams is, hey, now that we feel more comfortable with our data anonymization techniques, you understand k-anonymity testing, you understand some of these more, I hate to say traditional because I think they're still new for so many of us, but types of data anonymization or technical protocols that you've been using to ensure that you're complying with privacy regulations. Well, those same kind of anonymization protocols or same kind of techniques will not work in the same way with unstructured data or these new types of data that you're aggregating. So how do we build upon those skills and identify the gaps that we need to now ensure that we're still complying with the same regulations, especially for me, I'm working with organizations where they're combining data from over 40 countries, including humanitarian crises. And that's complicated from a regulatory perspective. So how do we really build up those skills on our data science teams or on our engineering teams so that we're ready to make use of really exciting tools that I see teams using to, better achieve their humanitarian missions, to gain new insights. There are really exciting possibilities, but we have to focus on expanding some of the really exciting skills that I've seen teams already building so that we can go forth and use emerging technology well. The other thing that I would say, and this isn't necessarily an AI governance thing, but one thing I've seen with more successful teams is the work that they've already done to diversify their teams, to have data scientists and engineers from diverse perspectives that live or work in the countries where data is being collected, where there's proximity. They are better able to anticipate their blind spots and risks than teams that are more homogenous. So the teams that I see like more confidently going forward and more accurately predicting risks have much more diverse backgrounds comparatively to more homogenous teams.
That makes sense. Mohamed, you mentioned that, you've transitioned from privacy research to responsible AI. So would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I can speak to my personal experience. Maybe some people can resonate. So I was working privacy research about like 3 years ago. Then I realized there is an emerging field coming very kind of like quickly into industry, specifically responsible AI. So I started really educating myself and understanding what sort of things I need to learn about. Then I realized a lot of the things that people talk about in responsible AI can't be mapped to privacy. For example, people talk about transparency and talk about privacy. How can they like be more transparent? For example, how do we have like informed consent? Then I was like, okay, I can bridge some of our kind of transition, some of my experience from privacy to responsible AI, make sure I understand new implications, for example, biases, fairness, accountability. So what I found most helpful was really kind of like relying on my engineering background. So trying to understand and update myself to new ML models, understand really the pipeline. I think that's one of the key points that I found most helpful when I'm communicating with people, especially AI developers, our technical managers, really trying to understand how the ML models are trained, how are they being used from like really data set level, thinking about the labor behind collecting those data annotation and all of that. So those are some of the social implications of AI that I feel like if people want to break into this field are really important to understand. And also really kind of like relying on some of the experience people already have. Again, we talk about accountability and privacy. If you're using some data, again, similarly here, people talk about accountability in AI. Some of those things I think I found super helpful, really reading a lot of blogs by these big companies like Microsoft, Meta, and also OpenAI. They have like so many kind of like posts that I learned a lot from them. So I think kind of like educating myself, like, and trying to understand new issues with AI really helped me fill that gap and transition into responsible AI. And it's been super fascinating so far. So I highly suggest that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for your thoughts. So just getting into the topic a little more in terms of like, how do we set it up and how do we actually build a governance program in our companies, or, how do we start looking at responsible AI if we've never done so before in our organizations? Alexandra, I think you mentioned that you'd worked with other companies. So what do you think are like the initial steps in, tackling AI governance and the initial stages of setting up, really?
Sure. I'd say the biggest one is build on what you have. So look at what is working in your existing privacy management program, in your existing data governance program. AI can seem daunting and it can be nerve-wracking for executives and other teams to start to tackle. But the reality is we're already doing a lot to get us there. So I'd say build on the processes that you have, build on the policies that you have, build on the working groups that you have. And as always with any good data policy change management practice, identify who is going to be affected by and have a stake in the new tools and approaches that you're trying to manage, and make sure that people are informed at the right level, that they're brought alongside at the right level, and that you have really, really strong tailored to the motivations and pain points that different teams that have a stake in adopting AI are feeling, because there is going to be nervousness from many different angles. So trying to keep it simple and building upon the things that you already have is just, if I could say one thing, start there.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Smita, you also mentioned that from a legal lens, you would like to leverage like an existing policy structure. So I'd love for you to expand a little more on that.
Yeah, I think exactly what Alexandra was saying. Change is hard for everyone, right? So there might be people at the company that are not necessarily doing AI development, right? They're not developers, but they speak to they're part of the customer success team. They talk to customers, or they leverage AI in a different way. Literally every vendor you probably have has now touted some new AI capability. So there's, a need to reassess the risk there and see what's useful and what's not. You have to see what's duplicative, what's not. But in terms of actually giving, your employees in your team some guardrails or guidelines, I think it's best to, again, just like start with the policies you have. You probably already have an employee handbook somewhere. Maybe just add a couple of lines there about what employees can do when they use AI for their work product. Maybe just add a couple of sentences about, hey, your work is still your own. You're still responsible for the quality, for tone of voice, if you're talking to a customer, to ensure you're not plagiarizing directly from AI output. So I think these can all just be principles that you codify in an existing policy somewhere. And then, maybe, again, customize your AI framework and your AI guidelines for folks that are knee-deep building, because I think they might need to hear a different message. So you might want to talk to them more deeply about how to use open source AI, how to use third-party tools, what kind of terms you want to see in vendor agreements. All of this can be, again, something that you talk to people that are using AI in a different way. And again, just having all of this build on, if you already have a process in procurement, when you vet third-party tools, maybe you can have this additional guidance be provided to your procurement team. It's already been doing a great job for however many years. So I think that can be a great way of doing it, instead of setting up this whole other beast and saying, now everybody stop what you're doing and now do this. That can be a little bit jarring for everyone. So, and I agree. I think that would be my recommendation too, is to start there. And then gradually, I always sort of say, start with a risk-based and harms-based approach. So, instead of just taking a statute, reading the 300 pages or whatever, however long the EU AI Act is, reading it cover to cover and saying, okay, now I'm going to comply with this. It's probably not going to be a good strategy for starting off. You probably want to start off by thinking, how can we get sued? This is my world. How can we get sued with what we're building, what we're using? And how do I stop that from happening? And then maybe I start sort of putting into place the framework I need based on those points. So that would be my advice.
Sounds good. Mohamed, did you have something to add about, the processes? I know you mentioned, it's easier to overcome friction when you have such policies in place already. So yeah, definitely love to get your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, sure. I can follow on what people were saying, just like mostly trying to build on top of whatever people have already. So it could be like privacy policies, or it could be other policies internal that's kind of like trying to inherit some of the things that are already in the company and trying to kind of like add pieces and bits related to AI. What I also found helpful is really to have a more collaborative approach instead of just trying to kind of like build new policies or like adopt someone else's policy or trying to kind of like add a few lines, making sure to have like other people's voices in this kind of like policy generation process through workshops or design sprints, having like 1 or 2 days, really bringing people from different teams in one room and making sure everyone has a voice. Like going back to the point that Alexandra had about diversity, what I also find really helpful and really interesting is that when you have people from like different countries or different ethnicities, different ages, different genders, then you really get a chance to have all these different kind of like perspectives that probably I hadn't thought about before, kind of like having these people in one room. So I really suggest having like a more collaborative co-designing approach to these kind of like policies. So taking in some of the things that we already have in the company, looking at some of the best practices or some of the government policies. For example, NIST has AI risk management framework, trying to kind of like have a short brief intro of that instead of asking people to read that document, having like 10-minute, 15-minute intro. This is what we want to talk about. And then really trying to customize and custom build that policy for the team and for the company.
Sounds good. And Smita, the next question was what you were alluding to, that, we can't work in silos. The privacy team has to work, cross-functionally. So according to you, who do you think, our main stakeholders would be in terms of, building up a responsible AI governance program? Would we be leveraging, and I know you mentioned we use, existing reporting structures and try to, leverage what we already have in place. So who do you think would be, our main stakeholders who would be responsible for assessing, the fairness, bias, transparency of these AI and ML models? And, at what stages of this entire development process and, risk assessment process would you think that, these people have to be involved with the privacy team?
Yeah. The previous panel had so I forget who said it, but I think people said, you don't have to necessarily report in the same way, but you have to report to each other. So I think that's like, in terms of reporting structure, I think that, you're unlikely to have like one person who's just like owning AI. Like we may end up there, but at least for now, most organizations, that's not true. There's just a lot of people that are in it in different ways. So I think it's important to talk to each other. It's so important to have diversity. I was going to say, sometimes you don't have existing things in place. Like, for example, a lot of companies now have started to establish ethics council or ethics committees, which, I hadn't seen before in this way. And I think it's because some generative AI has brought up all of these very novel issues where the laws aren't quite there to be able to cover the harms, but it feels wrong. So companies do want to set up sort of their community policy or their acceptable guidelines, and they want to have an ethics framework that they want to work from, right? And it's so important to have diverse voices in an ethics debate. I cannot stress that enough. You need, and I mean like ethics, diverse voices, not just in terms of like people from different countries or people with different backgrounds. Of course, that's important, but also people with different jobs, different skill sets. So you can't have an ethics council that's just made up of engineers and a couple of VPs. You need someone who actually is, maybe from sales or marketing, and who actually has a finger on the pulse of the customer and knows what customers expect from you as a company, expect from the industry that you're in. And I think having those folks in the room is super helpful. So you're not just in an echo chamber talking about how you think that you're doing a great job as a company in terms of ethics, but maybe your customers have a completely different idea and expectation. So I think that's going to be very important in terms of like how you build out your framework. There are going to be things that you start afresh that you maybe didn't have before. And when you do start them, it's going to be very important to incorporate different folks. You might have, in terms of like where you are, like if you're thinking about model development, I always stress that it's very important to work with your legal partners very early on. I think at the time of conception is sort of when I step in, because it's because, then we can sort of build on, okay, like what are we building and how do we build this right? We've seen privacy by design as a concept for a while now, so this isn't a new thing for any of us. But, ethics by design is also one of the things that's like starting to become part of our conversation. And so in order to get that, I think you have to start with, let's pitch the idea first. Let's make sure like what we're building is going to be useful and helpful and do the right thing. And if you start from that place and you start with good intentions, you're likely to make something really cool, which is going to be popular and good and, also legally sound.
Makes sense. And I think what we've also seen, in different companies as a consultant myself, I think we've seen that, we're always playing a little bit of a catch up game with, the machine learning teams and the AI teams. You mentioned that, ethics by design should be a thing. Privacy by design is definitely something. It's not a new concept for all of us. But yeah, I mean, it's not really recommended that we come in, at the end stages of deploying, the AI model or the ML model, and then tell them that, something that they've done in the time that they were conceiving the modeling was not entirely correct, and then tell them to go and retrain the model or tell them to go and, build from scratch. That would just add on to a lot of friction. And that's a real world implementation challenge that we've seen. How do we provide the guidance early on? How do we make sure that people are listening to the legal teams, the privacy teams, the ethics teams right from the beginning, so that, we don't have to do a lot of rework? Mohamed, you mentioned that, bringing different teams from all domains is key. So what are some of the other teams that you worked with in your, work in responsible AI?
Yeah, I mean, mostly kind of like I think most people know the UX team and also privacy security. What I found probably most helpful or most relevant is the Red TV part, which is kind of like what the security people usually do. So really trying to partner with like the security team, although the AI part is slightly different from security. So I I kind of want to say that I don't expect security people to understand like fully all the spectrum of vulnerabilities in AI, for example, biases, fairness, or trying to understand we are not like racially harming people or trying to understand all these issues that may not be classic security issues. That's kind of like one of the things I found most helpful. Yeah, I think mostly kind of like the security team, really partnering with them is like the key for us. And also previously, I found that really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Tarana, I think the next question is something that's, really exciting to most of our audience here. I think it might be, something that I can definitely take some insight from. There are, a number of different framework standards that we're seeing coming out on how to build your entire responsible AI governance program, and how do you, get certified in something like this? How do you get your company, certified? How do you measure success in, what you're building? So what are some of the frameworks that, you've seen companies use that are helpful with effective AI governance? And, what are some of the benefits and the challenges when using these frameworks?
Sounds good. Thanks, Vasudha. So I think before jumping into AI governance, just, what we're familiar with, right? We're familiar with cybersecurity governance, cybersecurity risk management, even privacy governance and risk management. And I think given the maturity of the internet's architecture and the tech stack and the TCP/IP, HTTP protocols and so on, those frameworks have evolved from being functional frameworks to now threat and event-based frameworks and even control-based frameworks. This 853 has 1,000 controls to address common security risks and vulnerabilities, right? The world of AI, we have the NIST AI risk management framework, which is now a year old. It's a sort of high level what functional framework, which talks about risk management, impact likelihood, and, effective risk management, strong governance program, and then touches on sort of these trustworthy AI characteristics, 7 trustworthy AI characteristics that are really common across all frameworks in some way, shape, or form, including the OECD framework, the emerging ISO standard, and some other frameworks as well. But really in sort of taking those high-level trustworthy AI characteristics and then saying, how do you translate that to AI-specific risk management, right? We're starting to see that evolve. UC Berkeley actually came up with this 120-page approach to, with 150 or so, a very AI-specific risks that then map to NIST's higher level trustworthy AI characteristics. But really interesting, right? Like a data poisoning attack falls under the secure, resilient AI trustworthy characteristic, and the questions that the org needs to ask itself about potential vulnerabilities to data poisoning, right? And while it's geared towards general purpose AI and foundational AI developers, really anyone can leverage it. And you mentioned standards. I think there's this new 42001 ISO standard that organizations can eventually get certified against for managing AI responsibly. Haven't really dived into the standard yet, but understand that it, again, touches on the ethics component, the legal component, and the risk management component. I'm curious to see how that shapes up. And then, other sort of frameworks exist. And honestly, for smaller orgs that may find the AI risk management framework too daunting, I think Bloomberg Law came up with a good sort of approach towards maybe legal compliance at this point, what global regulations exist for various use cases, and sort of helping organizations risk manage to legal compliance at this point in time. But of course, things are changing and rapidly evolving globally. So I think staying abreast of current regulation and standards is going to be a challenge. I also like Margaret Mitchell's rights-based approach to AI governance, and really like her approach on taking her model evaluation framework, and then looking at sort of people and use cases, intended and unintended consequences to identify the benefits, but also the areas where we have problematic use of technology. I think to answer your specific question on tools that can be used, there are tools for fairness and bias and interpretability that really have come from the old world of, machine learning used for, say, issuing a credit or loan decision for or against an individual. And there were laws around that, right? So, but those tools that were, some of them based on sort of math that might not hold true to today's sort of large language models and so on. Those tools are potentially the World Privacy Forum had a very good article on how those tools, including things like the Shapely algorithm and the Lime algorithm, how they're being applied off-label, so out of context, which means that maybe they're providing false comfort on certain areas that we're trying to leverage them for. So I think we just need to be cautious with retrofitting tools that were used for one purpose for another purpose. And companies like Anthropic and some of the foundational model developers, as well as NVIDIA, are coming up with ways for us to use technology against modern LLMs. I think NVIDIA had this auto bias tool that they leveraged or that they put out there to actually auto-generate sentences that can help with some automated bias testing. And what I found interesting is they specifically called out their ability to identify intersectional biases, which are sort of biases across groups, which I found super interesting. I think Google came up with a tool called MinDiff to not just factor in bias, but look at the trade-offs with model accuracy as well. And Anthropic came up with this super interesting paper and data sets with about 70 different AI use cases and these prompts that allow a model developer to sort of test their AI use cases with Anthropic's sort of data and prompts to identify and detect discrimination around for the 70 use cases. So there's so much. I mean, every month there's something out there that folks can leverage and see if it's something that they want to adopt in their organization. But just again, things are evolving so fast that it's hard to stay abreast of it all. And eventually we'll have sort of the threat events or control frameworks that we can all leverage more prescriptive than we have today. So that's sort of later on down the line. But I just think it's super interesting, fun, and hopefully everyone enjoys this journey of ambiguity and figuring things out as we mature our framework.
Thank you so much, Tarana. I know we're at time, so Hernando, back to you, and thanks everyone for sharing your insights on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vasudha. Thank you, Tarana, Alexandra, Smita, Mohamed. Really appreciate having you here. I'm sure the audience really appreciates it as well. I can see from the engagement on the chat, which I'm sure you can have this conversation continue for another half hour.